All right, today, our nation's highest court heard oral arguments in 2 of 3 major abortion-related cases that they'll hear this term. Now, this could be the most consequential year for pro-life Americans in more than a generation, going all the way back to 1973 when the court legalized abortion in Roe v. Wade. Now, the justices heard from attorneys arguing over Texas's Senate Bill 8, that's also known as the heartbeat law, which is in place. And one of these cases was Whole Women's Health versus Jackson, and the second, the United States versus Texas. Now, the third abortion-related case I mentioned earlier is Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization. That'll be heard 1 month from today, actually December the 1st. Joining me now to talk about today's oral arguments is Heather Hacker. She is a partner of Hacker Stephens LLP and is representing one of the intervener respondents in the U.S. versus Texas case. Heather, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Perkins. Glad to be here.
Heather, can you explain kind of what took place today? This case kind of jumped up ahead of some of the other cases before the Supreme Court. So what was in question before the court today with the Texas case?
So the funny thing is that these cases do involve an abortion law, but the abortion issue is actually sort of tangential to both of these cases. Both of these cases were up and the questions involved very technical, legal, procedural issues, sort of threshold issues that relate to the court's power to actually hear or entertain these particular lawsuits, because the law is fairly different from any other law that's been passed. And so the lawsuits that were brought raised sort of unique questions as to the court's power to hear these particular cases and the court's power to actually issue relief and against which government official, if any.
So this really didn't go to the heart of the issue of the constitutionality of Roe. It was more of the, as you said, kind of the side issues of what standing the Department of Justice has to go after the state of Texas. In fact, the Solicitor General, Judge Stone from Texas, argued that the Justice Department had no authority to pursue the case against Texas's heartbeat law because they keep going and trying to intervene. I have a clip I'd like to play of him today, the audio clip number 6, please.
The United States cannot seriously assert that the Constitution requires pre-enforcement federal judicial review. It opposes that result in virtually every other case. This court should reject its request for a special forum, remedy, and cause of action for this case alone.
So explain to our listeners what was going on there.
So that was part of the argument in the United States versus Texas case. And so the United States is arguing in that case that because Texas passed a law that they believe violates the Constitution, and the plaintiffs in the Whole Women's Health case have had difficulty obtaining relief, that means that the United States can come in and sue the state of Texas directly, which normally litigants are not allowed to do, but it's different for the United States. So the United States argued that they could come in and sue Texas directly to stop what they believe is an unconstitutional law. And so what Judd was talking about in that clip that you played was the question of whether it's a constitutional right to actually have pre-enforcement review of a situation where you feel like your rights are being violated. And he was pointing out the inconsistency in the United States position, because the United States generally takes the position that pre-enforcement review in court is not a right and is not always guaranteed. Certainly pre-enforcement challenges. And so that, just to clarify that, that's before you've been accused of violating the law, you bring an action to stop any action being taken against you under that law. And so there are certain circumstances where, yes, you can do that, but you have to be able to find the person who's going to enforce the law against you. Because a major misconception that a lot of people have about the way the law works is that courts do not enjoin laws, they enjoin people. specifically government officials who enforce the law.
And because there's no government actor in the Texas law, it's private action that's being taken. It's kind of turned things on its head. So we have the Texas law is in place. The Department of Justice has been back and forth in court trying to stop it. They get a favorable court, get a decision, but then Texas goes back and the law remains in place. So what is the time frame that we expect to hear from the Supreme Court on this case, and what could be the outcome of it?
So this case has been highly expedited. I'm sure that you've been aware the briefing schedule and the when the oral argument was scheduled was faster than any case, I think, besides Bush v. Gore. So it was very fast. I would expect the court probably to make a decision quickly. How quickly, I'm not sure. I would say probably more quickly than they normally make their decisions. So, normally in their big cases at the court, those big decisions tend to come out at the end of the term in June. I would expect this decision to come out well before that.
Will this have any bearing, or could it have any bearing on the Dobbs case, where that case which they take up on December the 1st?
So I don't expect this case to have any impact on Dobbs, but Dobbs could have an impact on this case. And that's because, once the courts wade through all of the novel procedural issues at play in the Women's Health case and the United States case, then the courts would reach the question of whether this law is constitutional on its merits. And that, of course, depends on whether or not, it will certainly be influenced by whether the court changes the abortion standard in the Dobbs case. So, it'll be interesting to see whether they rule on these cases before they rule on the Dobbs case, or whether they'll wait. My guess is they'll probably rule on these cases first, at least in this procedural posture.
Yeah, fascinating. Heather, I wish we had more time to talk because I've got a lot more questions, but I want to thank you for joining us today and for your insight in helping to explain this.
Thank you for having me.